Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
While my sister unwrapped a house key with tears in her eyes, and our father grinned like a man watching his legacy take form, I stood still, silent, almost frozen, not with joy, but with something colder, sharper. Then I handed him the envelope. Nothing fancy. Just a plain white rectangle, sealed tight, with a single sheet inside. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. When he opened it, and his eyes scanned the page, his hand began to tremble, not a little twitch, but the kind of shaking you see in old men when the truth finally climbs up from the grave. And when he looked at me, all I did was speak. For the first time in 20 years. But before we get to that, you need to understand how we got here, because revenge this quiet doesn't come overnight. I was born first, barely 2 years before Claire, but in our house, it always felt like I arrived by accident, and she arrived by design. My father, Gerald, though everyone just called him Jerry, wasn't a cruel man in the traditional sense. He didn't hit us. He didn't yell. He didn't throw furniture or threaten to leave. No, he was something worse. He believed he was fair. He believed he was just. He believed he loved us equally. And somehow, that made it so much more brutal. Because when someone is intentionally cruel, at least you know where the enemy stands. But when a man looks you in the eye and calls it tough love, while giving your sister the world wrapped in a bow, it twists something deeper inside. Claire was always the performer. The star. The girl who never had to be told anything twice. Her hair was always brushed. Her homework always done. She could cry on command and charm adults like she had been trained in it since birth. Meanwhile, I was the opposite, quiet, awkward, too introspective for my own good, always lost in books or thoughts that didn't belong in the real world. If Claire was the product Dad put on display, I was the shipping crate he forgot to unpack. Mom left when I was 11. No warning. No letter. Just an empty closet and the faint smell of her perfume on the pillows. I never blamed her. That house, that life, it could crush you if you let it. Dad took it as a betrayal, of course, and never spoke her name again. Claire cried for a week. I didn't cry at all. Maybe that's when it started, when he decided which one of us was still worth investing in. After Mom left, our house changed. It got colder, cleaner, more efficient. My father liked things predictable. He liked routine. He liked control. And Claire, bless her manipulative little heart, gave him exactly that. She became his project, his mission, his little legacy in the making. Every soccer game, every spelling bee, every minor achievement, she got a trophy, a dinner, a proud post-it note on the fridge. I once won second place in a statewide writing contest. He barely looked up from his paper. Still, I managed. I studied hard, stayed out of trouble, kept to myself. I learned how to make myself small, invisible, even likable in a quiet sort of way. I didn't argue when he gave Claire the bigger bedroom. I didn't protest when she accidentally ruined my favorite jacket or when she spread lies about me in school. Because somewhere deep down, I believed that if I just stayed good enough, long enough, maybe he'd see me. Maybe one day he'd say, "Laura, I'm proud of you." But that day never came. What did come, though, was the night everything broke. I was 16, a junior in high school, trying hard to keep it all together. But you know how life is, it doesn't wait for your schedule. I'd gone to a party with some classmates. Nothing wild. Just kids drinking cheap beer in a finished basement, pretending we were more grown than we were. I didn't drink, but I stayed too late. I made a mistake, trusted the wrong boy, turned down the wrong hallway. When I came home that night, shaking, scared, mascara smudged and throat raw from holding in tears, I needed help. I needed safety. I needed someone to believe me. I walked into the kitchen, and there he was, Dad, sitting with his bourbon and his spreadsheets like always. I tried to tell him what happened, how I felt, what I needed. And he didn't even look up. Just said, "If you're going to act like that, don't come crying to me afterward." I will never forget that sentence. It was like being stabbed with something dull and slow, something that didn't kill you, but made sure you bled long enough to remember. But what hit even harder was what I saw next. At the top of the stairs, halfway in shadow, was Claire. She had been listening. She didn't come down. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just stood there, smiling. Not a grin. Not a cackle. Just a tight, smug smile that said, "This is your place. And I like it." I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag. Stayed at a friend's house. Eventually went back, but something had shifted inside me. Whatever hope I had of being seen, being valued, being believed, it died quietly that night, and no one held a funeral. For the next 2 years, I did what I had to. I played the role. Got through high school. Earned a scholarship. And when it came time for college, Dad offered to help pay under one condition. I had to let go of that night. No more drama. No more accusations. No more making things difficult for Claire. He said it with a businessman's tone, like it was just another transaction. And I agreed. Not because I forgave him. Not because I believed him. But because I had no other choice. Funny thing about silence, it buys you peace, but it also costs you your soul. I didn't speak about that night for 20 years. Not to friends. Not to therapists. Not even to myself, really. But silence builds pressure. And pressure eventually explodes. So, when I watched Claire unwrap that house key like she had just been handed a throne, I knew the moment had come. I had waited 2 decades. And now, finally, it was my turn to speak. And he had no idea what that one page in that envelope was about to do. Some people think silence is weakness, that keeping your mouth shut means surrendering or submitting to the forces that seek to erase you. But in my case, silence was not weakness, it was a currency. A twisted kind of bargaining chip I was forced to carry like a lead weight for most of my adult life, and even though I told myself I had chosen that silence willingly, that I had taken the higher road by refusing to fan the flames of a fire I hadn't started, deep down I knew I had been bought. Plain and simple, and the price of that silence had been a college education and just enough distance to convince myself I had outgrown the war I left behind. After that night, the night my father turned his back on me and my sister stood there watching with that half smile that said everything words couldn't, I stopped trying to be seen. I stopped raising my voice in any room where people weren't interested in hearing the truth. I moved through the rest of high school with surgical precision, grades, sports, college applications, all mechanical, all calculated to get me as far from that house as possible without giving them a reason to take away the only escape route I had, my brain. So, when I got accepted into a small liberal arts college out of state, I knew the celebration would be muted at best. Claire was already halfway through a pre-law program, fully funded by Dad, naturally, and while my acceptance was technically good news, the vibe in the kitchen the night I told them felt more like a mildly interesting weather report. My father sat at the table with his evening scotch and said, "You know I'll help with tuition, but there's something I need to be clear about," and the way he said it, like he was laying out terms in a contract, should have tipped me off that this wasn't a gift, it was a trade. He leaned back, sipped his drink, and continued, "If I'm putting my money toward your future, then I need your full commitment to move on from the past. That means no more bringing up that night. No more accusations. No more dredging up things that divide this family. Claire has moved on. So should you." It hit me in the chest, not because I was surprised, but because of how matter-of-fact he was about it, how casually he folded my trauma into a line-item expense. The implication was clear. My voice had a cost, and if I wasn't willing to pay it, I could forget about college, forget about freedom, forget about starting a life that didn't orbit around Claire and her carefully curated perfection. I nodded. I smiled. I signed the silent agreement with a thank you and swallowed the words I wanted to scream. And that was that. For 4 years, I built a life with quiet bricks. I studied psychology, probably because I was trying to figure out what the hell was wrong with everyone I grew up with. I worked part-time in the campus library, lived off instant noodles, and never missed a class. I kept my head down and told myself that the best revenge would be living well, becoming someone who didn't need their validation, someone who would one day be able to look in the mirror and see a whole person, not a shadow. But the truth is, no matter how far you run, your roots come with you. During my senior year, Claire visited my campus, claiming she had a legal seminar nearby. She showed up unannounced, wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than my rent, and insisted we get dinner. I agreed, partly out of curiosity and partly because I hadn't yet figured out how to say no to her. We sat across from each other in a half-empty bistro, and she spoke for nearly an hour without ever asking how I was. She talked about her boyfriend, soon-to-be fiancé, her internship, her dad's new business partner who she found charming in an old-money kind of way. I nodded. I smiled. I said almost nothing. And just when I thought the evening couldn't feel more like a trap, she leaned forward and said, with syrupy condescension, "You know, I'm really proud of you, Laura. You've come a long way. I mean, for someone who almost fell apart back then." It was the way she said "fell apart" that made my jaw tighten. Like I had been some fragile, hysterical teen, like what happened to me was just a phase I had the good fortune to grow out of, like she had done me some unspoken favor by not blowing things out of proportion. I wanted to throw my water in her face. I wanted to grab her by that silk collar and scream in her smug little face, "You did this. You let it happen. You lied and you smiled through it." But I didn't. Because I had made a deal. So instead, I sat through dessert, let her pay the bill, and walked back to my dorm with a numb kind of fury, an ache that had nowhere to go. Still, I kept moving forward. I graduated with honors, found a job at a nonprofit counseling center, and rented a studio apartment so small I could touch the stove from my bed. But it was mine. And for a while, that was enough. Until I came home that Thanksgiving, the one where everything began to unravel. Dad was showing Claire and me some old boxes he wanted cleared out from the attic. Claire rolled her eyes and claimed she was too allergic to dust for attic duty, so I went up alone, half annoyed, half trying to avoid her. I sifted through boxes of yearbooks, receipts, and old family photos until I found a manila folder with Claire's name scribbled on it. Inside were notes, handwritten ones from Claire to our father, dated just days after the night I came home broken. In them, she described me as dramatic, said I had a habit of making things up, and warned him that I might try to ruin everything she was building. My breath caught. My stomach flipped. It was all there, the betrayal, the manipulation, the carefully crafted narrative that explained why Dad had shut the door, why no one believed me, why I'd spent 2 decades questioning my own memory. She hadn't just stayed silent. She had buried me with words. I took the folder, walked downstairs, and nearly handed it to him. But something stopped me. Not fear. Not doubt. Strategy. Because I knew in that moment, that one day, this would be the blade I used not to kill, but to cut clean through the lies they built their little empire on. So I put the folder in my bag, smiled at the dinner table like nothing had changed, and made a new promise to myself, one they wouldn't see coming. They bought my silence once. But they were going to pay for it later. And I would name the price. There's a specific kind of betrayal that doesn't hit you all at once, not like a punch to the face or a knife between the ribs, but instead seeps in slowly, drop by poisonous drop, until one day you realize that everything you believed to be vaguely salvageable about your family was nothing more than a well-dressed lie, a performance staged with the precision of a courtroom drama, and you, unfortunately, were the audience, the punchline, and the collateral damage all in one. I used to think that what Claire did to me that night, her calculated silence, her deliberate choice not to step in, was the worst part, the wound that shaped everything else. But it turned out that was only the opening move in a much larger, much colder game, one that I wouldn't fully understand until years later, when I discovered just how far she was willing to go to become the hero of a story she'd written over my corpse. After I found those letters, those perfect little manipulations hidden in the attic under the pretense of a family chore, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I'd memorized the slanted handwriting, the smug phrasing, the way she framed me as emotionally unstable while simultaneously positioning herself as the level-headed savior, and it made me sick to think that this wasn't something she had stumbled into. It was planned. She had looked at me, a broken teenage girl who had just gone through something unspeakable, and instead of offering a hand, she offered a knife, disguised as concern, and drove it between my shoulders with the full confidence that Dad would believe her version over mine. And he did. But here's the part that most people miss when they hear stories like mine. This kind of betrayal doesn't just come from malice. It comes from hunger, the kind of bottomless need to be adored, validated, praised without question, and for someone like Claire, who lived for that approval the way normal people need oxygen, my existence was a threat. Not because I was smarter. Not because I was prettier or more talented or louder. But because I remembered. I carried the truth like a scar on my spine, and deep down, I think she knew I was the only person in our lives capable of breaking the illusion she worked so hard to maintain. And so she acted first. For a long time, I tried to let it go, tried to move on, bury myself in work and routine and the vague hope that I would build something better than what I came from. But the universe has a twisted sense of humor, because the more I tried to disappear into my own quiet, stable existence, the more I kept being pulled back into the orbit of Claire's ever-expanding empire. She got married to a real estate developer named Eric, clean-cut, well-mannered, the kind of man who talks a lot about the market and makes you feel poor just by shaking your hand. I didn't go to the wedding, which was held in a vineyard 2 states away, complete with drones and a custom cocktail menu, but I saw the photos online, Claire in her designer gown, Dad giving a toast that made 3 separate publications' wedding features, and all of it screaming, "Look how perfect we are." Meanwhile, I was working overtime at a community mental health clinic, living paycheck to paycheck in a rented duplex with a mold problem, and wondering, not for the first time, if maybe I had overestimated the value of quiet dignity. The world, it seemed, didn't reward truth. It rewarded optics. And Claire was a goddamn professional. Still, I waited. Because if the letters had taught me anything, it was that patience, when weaponized, could be lethal. And then, about a year after the wedding, I got an unexpected message on Facebook from someone I hadn't thought about in years, James Callahan. James wasn't a friend. Not really. He was at that party, the one from that night. Back then, he was just another tall boy in a Letterman jacket, someone I barely registered until everything went wrong. But in the message, he wrote that he had heard through someone mutual that I was working in mental health, and he wanted to talk. Said he had been through some therapy himself, and that recently, some memories had come back. Vivid ones. At first, I didn't respond. I thought maybe it was a trick, a test, or worse, some kind of pathetic attempt to clear his conscience at my expense. But curiosity is a terrible thing, and after a week of pacing and debating, I finally agreed to meet him at a coffee shop just outside town. He looked different, older, softer, the bravado stripped away. But the moment he started talking, I realized 2 things. First, he remembered everything from that night, and second, Claire had spoken to him afterward. She hadn't just lied to Dad. She had gotten to James. According to him, Claire pulled him aside at school the Monday after it happened and told him in no uncertain terms that I was going through a psychological episode, that I had a tendency to fabricate stories when I was overwhelmed, and that if he wanted to avoid drama, he should stay silent too. She even thanked him for not making it worse. And he believed her. Because she was calm, confident, and above all, convincing. He looked down at his coffee as he told me this, voice shaking a little, and said, "I didn't know what to do. I was 17. She just made it sound like the truth." And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from clarity. Claire didn't just cover her tracks. She erased mine. She moved through the world like a politician, smiling for the cameras, shaking the right hands, writing her version of events in real time, and I had let her do it. My silence had been the ink she used to write her story, and the only way I was going to take any of it back was by turning her own methods against her. So I asked James if he'd be willing to put his story in writing, not for a lawsuit, not for the police, but for something I was working on, something personal. He agreed. And that night, I sat in my apartment, rereading his letter over and over, feeling the truth settle in my chest like a loaded weapon. Claire had built a kingdom on my bones. And now I had the blueprint to burn it down. There's a particular type of dread that creeps in, not like a scream in the night, but more like a slow, grinding hum that lives under your skin. The kind of psychological static that starts the second you open an envelope or check your inbox and see an email subject line written in that casually cheerful tone only someone completely disconnected from your lived reality would dare to use, and for me, that moment came when I received a pastel-colored digital invitation to what Claire described as a casual backyard celebration, the kind of euphemism that always means someone's about to make a spectacle of their own life and expects you to sit through it with a fake smile plastered on your face and a drink you don't want in your hand. The email was short, just a few lines really. Claire had always been efficient when it came to manipulation, and it read like this. Hey sis. Hope you're doing great. We're having a little get-together next Saturday at Dad's place, just close family and a few friends. Eric and I have some exciting news to share. Would love to see you there. It's been too long. There was a smiley face at the end, not a typed emoji, but a literal colon and parenthesis, like she thought that would soften the blow, like she hadn't been actively erasing me from my own history for 2 decades. I read the message twice, then a third time, and for a moment, I hovered over the delete button, thinking maybe I should just do what I always did: ignore, disappear, preserve what little peace I had by not stepping back into their curated circus. But then I remembered the manila folder in my closet, the printed letter in James Callahan's handwriting, the memory of my father's voice saying, "Let's not drudge up the past." Like it had ever been his to bury. And that's when I decided I would go, not because I missed them, not because I wanted closure, but because I had waited long enough. And there was a certain satisfaction in watching people squirm when you show up wearing the mask of civility while holding a truth so sharp in your back pocket it could gut the entire room. So I responded with a simple looking forward to it. See you then, and spent the rest of the week preparing not what I would wear or what I would bring as a gift, but how I would make my move, how I would time it with the precision of a scalpel so that when the moment came, there would be no yelling, no grand spectacle. Just silence. And then the crack that comes after silence when the truth finally breaks through the surface and takes everyone with it. The day of the event was, of course, picture perfect. One of those golden late summer afternoons where the air hangs heavy with fake nostalgia, where lawn chairs are arranged just so, and where everyone's dressed like they're in a magazine spread for suburban contentment. The house, still my father's, had been remodeled since I'd last been there, all new siding and imported patio furniture, but it still smelled the same: lemon cleaner, bourbon, and something faintly metallic beneath it all, like old resentment soaked into the walls. Claire greeted me at the gate with that same chirpy voice she used when speaking to bank tellers and yoga instructors, arms outstretched like we were close, like we hadn't spent 20 years orbiting opposite versions of the same lie. She wore a white linen sundress and gold earrings shaped like stars, and for a moment, I marveled at how someone could look so radiant and so hollow at the same time. "Laura, you came," she said, and I smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't touch your eyes, and said, "Wouldn't miss it," knowing full well I wouldn't have missed it for anything, not now. The backyard was full of familiar strangers, old neighbors, Dad's business associates, Eric's polished friends with their firm handshakes and empty conversation, and everyone kept talking about how amazing Claire looked and how lucky Dad was to have such a beautiful, successful daughter. I moved quietly through the crowd, sipping sparkling water, listening more than speaking, cataloging every compliment, every false memory, every carefully controlled narrative. And then, just as the sky began to shift into that golden hour glow that wedding photographers live for, my father called everyone to attention by clinking his glass with a spoon. "I want to thank you all for being here," he began, standing tall in his tailored shirt, his silver hair gleaming like wisdom rather than age, "and I especially want to recognize Claire and Eric, who've made me so proud over the years with their hard work, their devotion, and their vision for the future." There was applause, the polite kind, and Claire beamed like she'd just won something no one else was even competing for. Dad continued, "And today, I wanted to give them something, a small token, really, just to show them how much I believe in what they're building together." At that, he reached behind the grill table and pulled out a small white box, neatly tied with a red ribbon. Claire acted surprised, of course, the way she always did when receiving exactly what she expected. She untied the ribbon slowly, dramatically, then opened the box and gasped, actually gasped, as if she hadn't already seen the key weeks ago. "It's a second property," Dad announced proudly. "Just a little place across town they can fix up, rent, maybe even expand into something bigger. Every dream needs a foundation." The crowd clapped again. Champagne glasses clinked. Someone shouted, "You're amazing, Jerry," and I stood there, unmoving, watching her hold up that key like it was a damn crown. And in that moment, I felt nothing. Not jealousy. Not pain. Just confirmation. This wasn't just about one night. This was about an entire architecture of betrayal, brick by brick, lie by lie, built on top of a girl they had decided was too inconvenient to keep around. I let the applause die down, let Claire bask in her self-made spotlight, and then I stepped forward, quiet and composed, holding nothing but a plain white envelope in my hand. I didn't say a word. I just walked up to Dad, handed it to him, and said, "You should read this now." In front of everyone. The mood shifted immediately. Not violently. Not loudly. But like a pressure drop before a storm, subtle and unmistakable. Dad looked confused, then wary. He opened the envelope slowly, probably expecting a card or a sentimental note. Instead, he found a single sheet of paper, James's statement, clear and detailed, with dates and names and enough truth to burn the foundation of every lie Claire had ever built. He read it once. Paused. Read it again. His hand started to tremble. And the only sound in the yard was the wind moving through the trees. I didn't speak. Not yet. Not while he was still standing there, holding that page like it was radioactive. Because some truths don't need a narrator. They announce themselves. There are moments in life that don't arrive with fanfare or dramatic music or some divine signal that says, "This is it." No flashing sign above your head, no whispered countdown to impact, but instead they arrive dressed in silence. Cloaked in stillness so complete that your heartbeat becomes the loudest sound in the world, and in that silence, standing in the middle of my father's carefully staged backyard pageant, I watched him read the letter I had held onto like a live grenade, and as his hands trembled and his lips parted but no words came, I felt the slow, irreversible collapse of something that had been decaying in secret for years finally catch fire in the open air. He didn't speak right away. Didn't shout or ask questions or even look over at Claire, which was the first and clearest sign that the world he thought he'd built, the golden shrine to the daughter he believed was faultless, had begun to fracture under the weight of that one page, because when a man like my father stops looking for the villain in the room and starts looking inward, even for a moment, that's not just guilt, that's recognition. And recognition is always the first cut of truth. The guests didn't understand at first. There was no scandalous reveal, no headline-worthy outburst, just a slow hush that fell like a heavy blanket over the crowd, one by one, as they watched a man who had always been the most composed, the most articulate, the most infallible in their eyes begin to shake, as if the very act of holding that paper was taking something from him that couldn't be given back. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I simply waited. Because I had already said everything I needed to in the silence between my gesture and his realization. Claire, on the other hand, moved quickly, always had been quick on her feet, always knew how to read a room, how to pivot before the floor gave way. She stepped forward with that polished poise she wore like armor, tilted her head slightly, and gave a light laugh, tight, brittle, like it was made of glass, and said, "Dad, come on. Whatever that is, it's obviously some kind of mistake." She tried to reach for the paper, casually, like she was offering to spare him the nuisance, but he recoiled only slightly, but enough that she flinched, and that's when I knew, without a doubt, that no matter what came next, the illusion had broken. He looked up then, finally, eyes scanning the space between Claire and me, and for a moment I saw something flicker behind them, not anger, not confusion, but something closer to regret, like the weight of decades had just landed squarely on his chest, and he had no idea how to breathe under it. His voice, when it finally emerged, was hoarse, barely above a whisper, as he said my name, not like a demand or an accusation, but like a question he didn't know how to answer. "Laura." I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, not because I wanted a scene, but because I needed this moment to be exact, precise, unforgettable. I looked him straight in the eye, the way I never could as a child, the way I hadn't dared in years, and I said, "You believed the wrong daughter." I let it hang there, heavy and undeniable, then added, "And you spent your life rewarding the lie." There was a silence after that, deeper than any I had ever known, not because there was nothing left to say, but because everyone knew on some level that no words could undo what had just been pulled out into the light. Claire opened her mouth again, because of course she did, and started to launch into what I could only assume was a pre-rehearsed spin, something about misinterpretation and jealousy and people twisting things for attention, but her voice sounded different now, shrill, defensive, thinner than before, and even the people who had always leaned toward her with soft smiles and automatic praise began to look uncertain, their eyes darting between her and the letter, unsure of which version of the story they had bought into and whether that investment was about to go bankrupt in real time. Her husband, Eric, didn't say much. He had barely spoken all evening, but as Claire started to spiral into her damage control monologue, I saw him take a slow step back, and then another, until he was just far enough away that she could no longer touch his arm for emphasis. He looked at me once, and whatever was in his eyes, pity, maybe, or dawning realization, was enough to tell me that even if he hadn't known before, he knew now, and that knowledge had weight. My father sat down, still holding the letter, both hands gripping it like a rope, and for the first time in my life, he looked like someone who didn't know what to do next. That was the real justice, not yelling, not vengeance, not applause, but the slow, awful cracking of certainty in a man who had lived too long without ever questioning if he'd done enough to deserve the loyalty he demanded. I didn't stay for whatever came next. I didn't wait to see how the evening unraveled, whether the guests politely excused themselves or stayed to rubberneck the wreckage. I walked through the gate, down the driveway, into my car, and drove away without music, without noise, just the rhythm of my own breath and the distant sound of something final falling behind me. And as I turned out of the neighborhood, leaving the cul-de-sac of curated lies behind, I thought about how long I had waited for that moment. Not for revenge in the traditional sense, not to destroy anyone, but simply to place the truth where it belonged. Not hidden in the attic or folded in a manila envelope, but standing in plain view, undeniable and complete. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not scream, not rage, but hand someone the truth and watch what they do with it. And the truth, in the end, was this: Claire had built her life on a lie, and Dad had paid for it with his silence. But I had survived both. I had endured the betrayal, lived through the exile, carried the burden of being the inconvenient truth in a family that only valued performance. And now, finally, I had let go, not of the past, but of the need to prove anything to people who had never seen me clearly in the first place. It took me 20 years and one page to dismantle their illusion, but some doors don't need to be kicked open. Some just need a key and a little patience. And as I drove into the fading light, I knew that key had always been mine.